Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Warrant, another podcast by the Research Society of International Law. In today's podcast, we will be discussing the decision last week by the Financial Action Task Force to retain Pakistan on its grey list and provide Pakistan with a new action plan to comply with. ये जो फैसला था, it was a bit surprising for those working in this field in Pakistan, experts and policymakers and academics. And frankly, we are a bit disappointed as well because we felt that Pakistan had made substantial progress on this issue, provided a whole of government approach in the past 3 years, made a lot of progress capacity-wise, technically, effectiveness-wise, and to see, and that is reflected in the fact that FATF itself has started using much more positive language for Pakistan, acknowledging that we are making a lot of progress. And of the original 27-point action plan, we are now deemed compliant on 26 points. So only 1 point remains outstanding. But we were still retained on the grey list, and instead we've now been provided 6 additional points to comply with. So there is a sense right now, a bit of confusion, bit of turbulence, bit of anger. Many feel in Pakistan that the goalposts have been changed. International processes के ऊपर सवाल उठाए जा रहे हैं. There's a sense and a feeling that this whole process is political inherently, and that whatever Pakistan may do, we might still be found short of compliance and be required to do more. So to unpack all of this, because our objective at RSIL is to look at things objectively, impartially, and to kind of see what solutions can come out of it, what policy recommendations can come out of it. So आज की discussion में we want to kind of dive deep into what this whole process has been over the past 3 years. What does FATF now require of us? Where do we go from now? इसमें challenges क्या हैं पाकिस्तान के लिए, opportunities क्या हैं, and generally also what is the big picture for international law? How do we ensure accountability and transparency and acceptability of global governance mechanisms? और उसमें we think that FATF is a very interesting and a fascinating case study. And we'll dive deep into that as well. So my name is Jamal Aziz. I'm the Executive Director at RSIL. And for today's discussion, I'm joined by Ms. Noor Fatima, who is our Research Associate and Resident Expert on AML CFT matters. She has been closely following Pakistan's journey in this recent grey listing over the past 3 years and developed multiple publications and worked on different capacity building initiatives. So I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion. Welcome, Noor.
Thank you for having me, sir.
So Noor, what were the results of the June 2021 plenary, and why did it catch Pakistan by surprise?
So the results of the plenary, like you've summed up, we were found compliant on 26 out of 27 action plan points. And the one outstanding point was we did not have enough convictions or enough we could not demonstrate that our investigations were leading to successful convictions. And of course, this is the kind of point that will take time to demonstrate how effective our frameworks are. So it was expected that we might not be fully compliant on this last 27th point. However, a lot of people were still hopeful that the FATF itself would realize this is not a goal that is achievable overnight. And we were expected that we might come off the grey list. However, this last point was sort of expanded by the FATF, and a new action plan was created, a 6-point action plan. And this new action plan moved away from the counter-terrorism financing framework and addressed money laundering concerns. So the new action plan, the new 6 points that we now have to work on, they focus on areas of international cooperation, again demonstrating that that our ML investigations are leading to successful convictions, and also ensuring that our financial sectors and all the regulated entities, including lawyers, real estate agents, jewelry personnel, stuff like that, DNFPBs as we call them, they are being successfully regulated. So these are areas that Pakistan has been historically been a little bit weak on, and these are now at the core and heart of the new FATF Action Plan.
Okay, thanks for that, Noor. So broadly, तो हमारा पहले भी एक podcast इस पे हुआ था in which we went into detail on what FATF is, what this whole process is, and we'll put a link of that in this video as well, so that those who are interested to know about the background can kind of watch that podcast in more detail. But for today's podcast as well, I think it's important to kind of set the stage कि ये FATF का ये process क्या है. So broadly speaking, तो Financial Action Task Force, it's not a convention-based, not a treaty-based body. It's not something which Pakistan ratified to be a part of, but it's a watchdog which evolved with a limited mandate in the late 80s and globally grew to develop standards initially on money laundering and then on terrorism financing. And after 9/11, as the UN Security Council Chapter 7 framework kicked into high gear, those frameworks became entwined with the FATF recommendations, and now through the Security Council Chapter 7 resolutions, it became binding on all countries to comply with the FATF standards.
Right.
And those we see are also now reflected in international conventions, in high-level commitments and resolutions by multilateral bodies, or funding institutions like the IMF and the World Bank also now prioritize implementing the FATF standards. So हम देख रहे हैं कि even though it's an evolution of international law, because पहले ज़माने में treaties होती थी, treaty को आप ratify करते थे, you would signal your intent to be bound by these commitments, और फिर treaty के अंदर mechanisms होते थे.
You could state your exemptions or...
Exactly. आप कहते थे कि हम इस treaty के 40 articles हैं, इन 40 articles के 35 के साथ हम agree करते हैं, 5 की हमारी reservations हैं, उस पे आप you would have बहस होती थी, diplomatic posturing होती थी, and then there used to be committees that used to review your work periodically, and उसमें भी काफ़ी space होता था. FATF के केस में हम देख रहे हैं कि technical standards हैं, और वो it demands compliance from private sector as well as public sector institutions. That's right. And what I think the brilliance of those who have drafted and come up with these global frameworks is that they have seen that private sector is the main driving force which forces states to comply. तो उन्होंने ये किया कि उन्होंने बोला banks को, for example, कि अगर आप एंटी मनी लॉन्ड्रिंग और काउंटर टेररिज्म फाइनेंसिंग की ऑब्लिगेशंस को, इंटरनेशनल ऑब्लिगेशंस को डोमेस्टिक अपने इंटरनल प्रोसेसेस में नहीं डालेंगे, तो फिर बैंक्स पे रेगुलेटरी फाइन्स बिलियंस ऑफ डॉलर्स की लग जाती थी. So initially when it started happening in Western states as well, it sent shock waves and it forced immediate compliance, because private sector की तो there is the primal need of a private sector is to survive and to thrive, right? So if any framework comes up under which there is a risk कि अगर आप comply ना करें तो आप blacklist हो जाएंगे, या आपके ऊपर fines लग जाएंगी, regulatory violations हो जाएंगी, then it suddenly becomes much more the need to comply becomes real.
That's true.
And that is, I think, the main, the efficacy of FATF comes in the fact कि अगर एक मुल्क grey list पे होता है, तो एक foreign investor बाहर मुल्क में अगर वो invest करना चाहता है पाकिस्तान में, he has to comply with the additional due diligence requirements of investing in Pakistan.
That's true.
If he doesn't do that, तो उसके ऊपर भी fine लग सकते हैं, उसके ऊपर checks and balances भी हो सकती हैं, और the banks through which he complies am I getting that right?
You are, sir. In simple terms, the economic costs go up. An investor who wants to invest in a developing country would rather much take his money to a different country where there aren't as stringent controls, where he is not at the risk of paying extra fines, where he doesn't need to do any additional work, because there are other countries that are developing and they're not on the grey list. And the FDI, foreign direct investment, फिर भी it's a separate ball game, but with the kind of scrutiny that other financial institutions have, I would say that any businessman or business entity in Pakistan, I would say that they have been affected by the FATF in some way.
Yeah.
Whether it's when they're importing or exporting or getting
Inbound,
raw materials.
outbound दोनों transactions को ऊपर एक filters लग जाते हैं.
Filters लग जाते हैं. There are additional controls. There are lost contracts, frankly. Some estimates suggest that the economic losses could be in billions for Pakistan since 2018.
So the cost of business goes up.
Cost of business goes up, and if any issue comes up, instead of being able to resolve it, the foreign investor or the foreign client, whoever, will just directly take his business elsewhere because no one wants to bear the cost.
बिल्कुल ठीक है. Having said that, पाकिस्तान की grey listing में एक, I mean, अगर हम objectively, if we step aside as Pakistani citizens,
right.
If you look at it objectively, FATF की mutual evaluation report हुई थी. I think the first one, the current grey listing cycle में 2018 में था वो, इस 19 में था.
It was conducted in 2018 and it was published in 2019.
Okay, so उसमें वो mutual evaluation report was quite an eye opener.
Yeah.
Because उसमें उन्होंने because FATF की 40 recommendations हैं which require multiple things. I mean, it requires primarily आप चाहते हैं कि financial institutions के ऊपर checks and balances हों, उनके जो supervisors और regulators हों उसमें ये AML और CFT के protocols हों. उसके अलावा certain sectors जो high risk sectors होते हैं private sector में, for जिसको DNFPBs कहते हैं. What does DNFPB stand for?
These are designated non-financial businesses and professions, and they're traditionally seen as the gatekeepers of the financial regime. So for our purposes, these include realtors, real estate agents, jewelry and precious stones industry, इसके अलावा lawyers आ जाते हैं, accountants आ जाते हैं. The idea is that anyone with illegal monies or black money or illicit proceeds of crimes, whatever, they have this stack of cash. How do they park it? How do they secure it in a way?
And we know कि पाकिस्तान में a major form of laundering money is in the real estate sector.
It's
आप
in
ज़मीन खरीद लें मुख्तलिफ इलाकों में, या आप jewelry ले लेते हैं.
Right.
जो lawyers हैं, they are also gatekeepers because they can help you set up those complex corporate structures.
Exactly.
Offshore companies हो गई.
Beneficial ownership arrangements बना लेते हैं जो transparent नहीं होती.
Exactly.
They create all these companies and layer them up.
Exactly.
So these are
accountants, though obviously they advise. They can play the role of advisors or other things as well, and they are most well versed with money flows and how they go about. So तो एक तो FATF ये require करता है कि इन लोगों को भी आप checks and balance regulate करें. और फिर FATF ये कहता है कि criminal justice frameworks जो हैं, you should be able to detect, investigate, prosecute offenses of or violations of all of these anti-money laundering, terrorism financing laws. So you need to have legal frameworks that detect and penalize money laundering and terrorism financing, and then you need to have criminal justice processes and executive processes which can detect, investigate, prosecute and effectively adjudicate these offenses as well. So अगर आप पाकिस्तान के केस में देखें, objectively speaking, तो हमारा जो 2019 mutual evaluation report थी, that didn't make for good reading for us, because उन्होंने यही बोला कि हमें risk समझना, we don't understand the risk, we haven't conducted a risk assessment, so we didn't know. Anecdotal तो थी, हमें पता था कि smuggling हो रही है, narcotics से है, real estate sector में वो है, problems हैं, but we knew that we didn't really know sectors क्या हैं. So can you explain the risk-based approach broadly?
Sir, yes, of course. The MER looks at, it's a huge undertaking, and like I mentioned, it takes a year to compile the report as well. It looks at all the laws, all the regulations that are currently existing.
Sorry to cut you. ये FATF assessment कैसे करता है? उनकी टीम आती है, उसमें कौन लोग होते हैं, क्या होता है उसमें?
FATF, this is part of that. So FATF का, whoever is a member of a FATF or a FATF style regional body जो हमारे ऊपर apply होता है, that's the Asia Pacific Group. APG
जिसको कहते हैं.
APG,
which is based in Australia, right?
It's based in headquartered in Australia. So they are required, as part of, because they are a member, they will be evaluated, and that's part and parcel of being involved in the system. At present, more than 200 jurisdictions, pretty much the entire world, is under the FATF regime. And evaluations have been scheduled. So experts from the local APG type body and some experts from the FATF Secretariat accompany and visit countries. They conduct on-site inspections, जिसे हम mutual evaluation report या जो उसका result mutual evaluation.
So when they came to Pakistan, they would have met financial institution regulators. They would have met, key ministry में लोग, criminal justice processes लोग.
Exactly, criminal side पे भी, and also meeting with regulators, meeting with the State Bank, the SECP,
or federal and provincial entities. And they conduct an assessment of all the rules, all the laws, every single notification that has been passed, a very thorough, deep analysis. And also cases that have been generated under those laws.
Yes. So they will also legal side pe legal compliance dekhte hain, and then they look at statistics. They look at how many convictions have happened, how many cases are underway, that sort of thing. So
it's a very intrusive kind of a process as well.
It's intrusive, and it just doesn't look at the laws. It looks at the policy element as well. कि आपकी policies क्या हैं.
और उनकी effectiveness भी देखती है.
उनकी effectiveness. यहाँ पे वो फिर technical और effective compliance वाली चीज़ आ जाती है.
So FATF has multiple. They have a technical framework, and then उसको वो देखते हैं कि वो effective है कि नहीं है. So there are different metrics for gauging technical efficacy, and there are different metrics for gauging effectiveness. कि कानून तो है आपके, laws हैं. और so objectively speaking, हमें पता है बड़े अरसे से पाकिस्तान में whoever works in the law and policy sphere, we know कि हमारे laws होते हैं, but वो implementation का issue है. Talk shows भी आप रात को देखें, हमेशा ये point होता है कि जी law है मगर implementation नहीं है, effectiveness नहीं है. So objectively we do know कि म्यूचुअल एवेल्युएशन रिपोर्ट जो 2019 की थी, उसमें उन्होंने बोला कि पाकिस्तान ने कानून साजी तो की है, बिकॉज पाकिस्तान का ये तीसरी बार था कि हम ग्रे लिस्ट हो चुके थे. पहले 2 बार जब हम ग्रे लिस्ट हुए थे, आई थिंक द फर्स्ट वाज इन 2006-07 एंड द सेकंड वाज अराउंड 2012-13, अराउंड दैट टाइम. वो पहली ग्रे लिस्टिंग में वो पाकिस्तान को कहते थे कि आपके कानून नहीं है. So for example, in 2006-07 we didn't have an anti-money laundering act. हमारे anti-terrorism laws में terrorism financing adequately defined नहीं थी. हमारे की इदारे नहीं थे, financial monitoring unit type इदारे नहीं थे, structures नहीं थे वगैरह. So those were arguably lesser. But 2018 में जब उन्होंने assessment की, उन्होंने बोला कि चले कानून तो आपने काफ़ी हद तक बना लिए हैं, but we are not seeing implementation of that. Your investigation, your cases on money laundering result almost always in acquittals. I think there was some crazy statistic कि हमने, I don't know what was the period, but 2,420 cases थे on registered under money laundering head, and उसमें एक conviction हुई थी. So उन्होंने बोला कि आप जब तफ्तीश करते हैं तो आप financial intelligence नहीं use करते. आप अपनी outdated पुलिस की जो सरकारी तफ्तीश थी उन्होंने देखी, and they said that all of them are broadly the same. हर किस्म का केस एक किस्म का है. The language is the same, the processes are the same, the methods are the same. So उन्होंने बोला कि तफ्तीश आपकी वीक है, prosecutorial capacity आपकी नहीं है to do specialized investigation. Judges को समझ नहीं है इन procedures की, so and they're not capable of dealing with complex cases. हमने देखा पाकिस्तान में कितने high profile money laundering cases हुई हैं, which have resulted in kind of confusion everywhere. तो एक तो उन्होंने ये किया. बाकी उन्होंने क्या उनके major financial regulatory side पे क्या issues थे, and what were their views on our DNFPB sector?
Sir, I would actually say that the FATF revises its methodology as well. And in the MER, they didn't just say कि आपकी effectiveness नहीं है. They also said कि आपकी technically भी you have huge gaps where people can, they can just get out of the system and they can exploit the system. So technically we were also found deficient, but effectiveness was also a key concern area. And on top of that, there were entire categories where our compliance was, we did not have anything. There were voids in
मतलब उन्होंने बोला, for example, कि आपकी real estate, like in Pakistan, if you want to be a real estate agent, you can just become one.
You can become one.
There
You
is no
don't-
license, there is no regulatory framework.
There's no training. There's no way of detecting if a client is coming to you as a realtor. You are now expected to see if this person giving me laundered funds. Are
Yeah.
these proceeds of crime? I should report them.
और अगर
There's
आपके
a
साथ कोई
duty to
fraud भी
report.
हो जाए तो there is no real mechanism, accountability for
Precisely.
the वो.
Yeah.
Same goes for jewelers.
Same goes for jewelers.
You can just open a jewelry shop.
Yep.
Pretty
Yep.
much that's it. You just have to apply for other than the tax and those kind of regulatory checks, there's no technical checks on you.
There's no technical checks, and we did not have any laws at that time.
Yeah.
We also, international cooperation में we did not have any mechanisms in place. We just had our one extradition act और वो किस तरह से utilize होती थी.
वकीलों को भी आप देख लें, वकीलों को भी like you have the bar councils, but are they effective? How much do they hold their members to account?
Exactly.
Anti-money laundering और terrorism financing, कितने lawyers को training है उसके ऊपर?
Sir, वो तो basic level पे बात. Now, अभी तो we're just saying that these are the laws that were not there. But then the FATF is like, instill in these laws, and on top of that, ensure risk-based assessments हो रही हैं, ensure record keeping हो रही है, ensure reporting
STRs file हो रही हैं.
STRs file हो रही हैं. And then on top of that, the icing on the cake, ensure that your authorities are implementing these.
Yeah.
कि जो नहीं कर रहे हैं ये, जो violators हैं, उनको sanctions पड़ रहे हैं, उनको jail terms मिल रही हैं. तो ये gaps थे. There were significant gaps.
So ये तो हम objectively इस side पे आ गए कि ठीक है, there were Pakistan was found wanting, और उसकी basis पे उन्होंने 27-point action plan बनाया. 27-point action plan में there was regulatory aspects, there were criminal justice aspects. A major point of the action plan was our ability to apply targeted financial sanctions on UN designated entities. Now, this is a very hot topic of contention because और इसमें थोड़ी सी analysis की भी ज़रूरत है. The context, I think it's important for the viewers also to understand कि अगर आप एक process देखें मुंबई attacks के बाद, खासकर 2000 around 2008 onwards all the way up to 2018-19, Pakistan के ऊपर significant pressure था to take action against non-state actors, and we saw the Indians apply a very heavy because Mumbai happened, Pathankot, Uri, Pulwama, these different incidents took place, and at this point US-Pak relations also went through a turbulent period, Salala and all of these different incidents. Pakistan itself was in a flux, transition from a military regime into democracy and all the issues, lawyer movements and different institutions asserting themselves. The 18th Amendment had taken place in 2010, right. Massive devolution, which was quite chaotic. The whole process has been chaotic. Yeah. So we suddenly went through a period around 2010 onwards, जिसमें हम international spotlight पे भी आ गए, because earlier in the war on terror 2001-2 में we were, we were the partners which the West wanted. Frontline state में थे, Pakistani government and everyone was in, the darling of the West for a certain period of time. Thoda sa hamari upar wo thi, a lot of aid flowing in, a lot of different things. But suddenly we found ourselves in a situation where we were now being accused of state-sponsored terrorism. Pressure started applying, relationships started withering away. We started being perceived negatively by Western powers as well. And it coincided with a period where our own domestic processes were in a flux. वही बात कि 18th Amendment, पता ही नहीं था लोगों को कि ये चीज़ फेडरल डोमेन में आती है कि प्रोविंशियल डोमेन में आती है. Lawyers movement चल रही थी. There was a discontent with the way things are. Judges were asserting themselves, making very, trying to. उस time पे we saw a disconnect in our state institutions. And suddenly there was pressure and we were not able to effectively argue or deal with the different pressures that are coming in. So एक image बन गया कि Pakistan state sponsor of terrorism है and it's not taking action against UN designated entities. We saw certain entities, Hafiz Saeed, Maulana Masood Azhar, Lakiyur Rahman Lakwi, JUD वगैरह वगैरह, इनकी listing हो गई Security Council में भी, so they became UN designated terrorists. So every action, like every rally that went out, every acquittal that the state was grappling with it through detention orders, which were being challenged in the high courts. The judges were asserting themselves कि नहीं, why should we comply with international law? What is 1373? What is 1267? हम तो कानून पे चलेंगे, हम तो उसमें चलेंगे. And we didn't evolve our processes. ना हमने mutual legal evaluation को समझा, ना हमने so एक pressure आया. So how do you think all of this ties in with then the grey listing as well? Because suddenly, so for a lot of time Pakistan के ऊपर pressure था, do more, convict, prosecute, and then that went quiet. No one asks right now कि मुंबई पे क्या update है, लोगों की क्या. And suddenly the process changed and it became FATF oriented and it became broadly to take action. Do you think this analysis of mine, I'm just clutching at straws here, or there is some truth to it?
You're tracing, I mean, you're connecting FATF, you're situating it into the broader global world order, and also rising states like India and their prominence economically means that they are able to sort of get their way with international institutions as well. Whether that was part of their political goals or not, that's again a completely different debate. But we have to understand that we cannot also look at FATF in isolation. It is part of a global governance body. In the FATF Secretariat, there are around less than 40 countries, and India is a member there as well. So we see that, and this is the plenary, this is the body that makes the decisions to grey list or pull out of the grey list. So these geopolitical considerations are relevant, and they will be relevant. And
they always have been, in fact, but the international law has always been, used as an instrument of statecraft.
That's right.
We feel that, as practitioners, हम तो कहते हैं कि international law का बड़ा scope है for cooperation, for bringing people together, for best practices. But no doubt it has always, advanced states have always used it to, have always leveraged it to their advantage.
That's true. But what's interesting to see is that India, when it, for example, or any country, I would also add China to the list, when they begin to rise in prominence in the global order, they co-opt themselves and become part of these institutions. And that is something that Pakistan needs to learn as well, especially at this point where it seems so far-fetched. हमें अभी हमने इतना progress किया है, फिर दोबारा grey list में डाल दिया, all of that. But this is the strategy that I feel we should apply. We should learn from our neighboring countries and see how we can express ourselves on the international level, have our narrative heard. I personally feel, and also this is something that FATF also has backed up, technically we're now compliant on 31 out of 40 recommendations as per the FATF report. Yani technically हमारे अब laws बन गई हुई हैं, इन पे implementation करनी ज़रूरी है. That in itself should be a success story, and Pakistan should assert itself in a way internationally that our narrative should be, frankly, that we not only defeated terrorism, we've also tackled this ambitious action plan that the FATF handed to us. And now we are committed to performing well on the remaining points as well. And no country has ever done that. And we should be signaling our willingness to be a part of this, so that eventually Pakistan can become a part of the FATF Secretariat and achieve its whatever state objectives or goals internationally, diplomatically.
I think those are some excellent points. I mean, that is what we at RSIL have been trying to portray, because hamara, ever since we've been around for 30 years now, and our mission from the very beginning has been, to promote a responsible Pakistan. Now, a responsible Pakistan means a Pakistan which is aware of its international obligations and which can contribute to the development of these global processes. I mean, we don't want to be a country which is a pariah state, which is signaled out for, arm twisted into compliance, but we want to actually showcase, जिस तरह आपने बोला, ourselves as a success story, that we took on this challenge, because ये जो 27-point action plan हमें मिला June 2018 में, it required far-reaching reforms which politically were very difficult, जो बड़े अरसे से structurally problematic थी. Structurally there was resistance to all of these different things. खासकर हम criminal justice field में काम करते हैं. couple of years ago, just the fact that you know using video link was frowned upon.
Exactly.
Criminal procedure code हमारा is 1898 का criminal procedure code है हमारा. We know कि उसके अंदर issues हैं, we know कि उसके upgrade, but there is always this status quo preserving entities or people who say कि नहीं कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है. But now we saw कि FATF requires fast track compliance, real time monitoring, lean processes. और ये चीज़ें हमें I feel that the grey listing was a blessing in disguise, and many people in this field, in this space, जो policy makers हैं या practitioners हैं, वो secretly खुश थे कि grey listing हुई है, because it provided us the political impetus to enact those reforms. The MLA Act, for example, we've been wanting and advocating on mutual legal assistance for years. Now it's become a international legal compulsion on us. Right. So as part of this effort, I want to highlight this report that we released in this month, in June 2021, जिसमें हमने independent एक assessment की थी on how, because if FATF के जो 40 points थे, we independently assessed them and what Pakistan did, and then we kind of looked at what other countries also did as well. So can you explain our methodology briefly, Noor?
Yes.
And what did we find?
So, of course.
This report, by the way, is available on our website, rsilpark.org.
So, just to very, very briefly sum up this 150-page report, the FATF looks at 40 technical recommendations that basically, do we have these laws, rules in place or not? That's the only thing that the FATF looks at when we say technical compliance. In this report, we have looked at these 40 recommendations that revolve around what is the nature of our money laundering and terrorism financing offenses. Do we have transparency provisions in place? What are the nature of the sanctions that can be applied by the financial sectors and other authorities? How are our law enforcement agencies and other authorities functioning? Do they have the required powers or not? International cooperation ke frameworks hai nahi hai? Also, preventive measures. This is something that I wanted to highlight because the financial, and we mentioned the private sector earlier as well. Preventive measures basically means that before money laundering or proceeds of crime can be placed into the system, we have measures in place that can detect these things, and cases can be initiated just upon those. And these involve at times very simple things. And this is where you don't just need the government, you need the private sector on board. So for example, if you have a customer coming in, you should be able to conduct due diligence to see where is this person coming from? Are they connected to a political entity or not, for example? Are there proceeds of crime involved or not? Are they part of the UN designated are they designated by the UN, for example? These kind of measures. And this is where in our report, we found that Pakistan really upped its compliance. It forms the largest chunk of the 40 recommendations as well. Yeah. So around 20 or so recommendations.
I think हमारी जो re-rating थी, we deemed Pakistan compliant, fully compliant on 10, largely compliant on 24, partially compliant on 6, and non-compliant on 0. Now,
out of 40.
Out of 40.
Yes.
And and it was interesting because FATF's follow-up report came out
days after we had published.
Days after, just 3 or 4 days afterwards, and we were happy to see that we were broadly aligned, and in fact, in many cases, we were rating Pakistan more stricter or more stringently than FATF did as well.
Then the FATF did as well.
इसमें interesting हमें चीज़ ये थी that we looked at the laws of several other countries.
Of multiple other
हमने FATF की जो mutual evaluation process है, that is available online, open source material था. All of our research was open source. So nothing of this is secret documents. It was just based on hours and hours of online research. But we saw कि Bangladesh, Bhutan, Tunisia,
Iceland,
what were the different processes they were subjected to?
Right.
उन्होंने कौन से, so if there is a technical recommendation number 27 for example, I'm just randomly using a number,
Right.
27 पे, तो उस पे हम देखते थे कि आइसलैंड अगर ग्रे लिस्टेड था, उसमें प्रॉब्लम्स थी, तो what were those problems, what law did they pass to get off the grey list, और हमने फिर क्या लॉ पास किया, उन लॉज के बीच में क्या सिमिलैरिटी थी, was it structurally broadly the same. In many cases we found कि पाकिस्तान went beyond what the other countries had done.
Yes.
And was found by FATF to be compliant as well then.
Exactly.
But फिर भी आप grey list पे रह गए. So इसमें I want to now delve, because we can talk about FATF and the technical things for a long time, but थोड़ी सी अभी सियासी बातों पे आते हैं. Political वो, I think those listening to the podcast would be also zoning out with our technical top discussions. अगर ये, बिकॉज पिछले दिनों से हम ये देख रहे हैं, जब से फैसला आया व्हाट्सएप पे लोगों ने चार्ट्स बनाई हैं, पोस्ट्स बनाई हैं, फॉरवर्ड एज रिसीव पोस्ट्स आ रहे हैं, लोगों ने ये देखा है इन अ सिंपलर फॉर्म, इन एन अवामी फॉर्मेट के ये रिक्वायरमेंट्स थी आइसलैंड की, बांग्लादेश की, होंडुरस की, फलाना की, उनकी फॉलो अप कंप्लायंस रेटिंग ये है. इन मेनी केसेस वी आर फाउंड वी हैव मच हायर कंप्लायंस नाउ than other countries which are in the white list. White list is not even a term that exists, but ठीक है,
delisted.
They're delisted. But चले, let's for the sake of discussion just use white list countries. So white list में बहुत इस तरह के मुल्क हैं जिसकी ratings technically कम है हमसे. Action points हमारी compliance होगी है 26 out of 27, but still we are in a grey list and now we have new points. ठीक है, understood कि ये नया पॉइंट भी जो एक्शन पॉइंट आया, हमें पता है कि कॉपरेशन में हम वीक हैं, हमें पता है कि नए एक्शन पॉइंट्स में रियल एस्टेट सेक्टर इज़ अ मेजर एरिया फॉर मनी लॉन्ड्रिंग. ठीक है, उसके ऊपर फोकस है, ML इन्वेस्टिगेशंस पे फोकस है, और UN डेजिग्नेटेड एंटिटीज के खिलाफ हमने एक्शन लेने हैं. ठीक है, वी नो दीज आर आवर वीकनेसेस, बट देयर आर द आर्ग्यूमेंट इज मेड इंक्रीजिंगली. मैं आई एम कंसिडर्ड अ FATF someone who follows FATF closely. मेरे से हमेशा सवाल पूछा जाता है ड्राइंग रूम डिस्कशंस में, uncles and others, they say कि, और military officials or political officials or bureaucrats or family members even, कि tax havens हैं पूरी दुनिया में.
That's true.
We know कि money laundering happens on a much bigger scale in several countries all over the world. Then countries like Afghanistan and war torn countries हैं, सीरिया की तरह, नदर्स, जिनके में तो कुछ भी नहीं है, कोई प्रोसेसेस नहीं है, वो ग्रे लिस्ट पे नहीं है, ब्लैक लिस्ट पे नहीं है, तो हम हैं. सो इज इट लिंक टू geopolitical considerations? Is the US trying to armstrong us into something, और इंडिया की alliances को वो कर रहे हैं, या the West is France is signal, मतलब लोग कहते हैं कि फ्रांस हमारे खिलाफ is trying to give us pressure, whatever. I mean, I'm not endorsing their view, I'm not, but there is an argument. So what do we say to that? Like, what is the response?
I think that's interesting. There's always, when we look at it from that perspective, when we just like listen to all of this, it does sort of lead one to think that, okay, is it discrimination happening against Pakistan? Is it that, are there some other ulterior motives in play, and we're being sort of manipulated into something? That's a perspective out there, and I would say that rather than just wallowing in that, in that frame of mind, because once we start thinking along those lines, we stop progressing ourselves.
Victim mentality
ban jati hai, and we just don't commit to fixing the problem as much as we would have before. So I would highlight these as weaknesses of FATF as an organization, that it puts itself forth as a global governance body, and it's standards-based, technically oriented. However, it is weak enough that it cannot withstand its own political compulsions or considerations that can factor into decisions.
That's a very well articulated.
It happens
response.
with a lot of organizations, and I think that's why it's critical to begin studying global governance bodies, because SE bodies, they have the power to strong arm countries into passing laws and conducting these, intrusive qism ki inspections and passing judgment on countries and their frameworks, and also forcing other countries to take actions against
I think those are some fantastic points that you just highlighted. I also want to unpack some of them from my own end. मेरे लिए तो ये देखिए, we have been working, RSIL has been operating for 30 years and I've been working in this space for 10 years. You're also now rapidly, you've actively been working for several years on this field. हमारा मकसद तो ये है, in a country which is inherently skeptical of international law, which inherently lacks capacity in international law, ना हमारी वो sophistication है, ना हमारी वो pedigree है in research or in academia in this area, as an entity that believes, again, firmly that international law offers a lot to the world, offers a lot to Pakistan in terms of cooperation, whether it's in trade, climate change, anti-money laundering, CT, human rights, etc. We genuinely think it provides the best scope for cooperation and the best model currently for cooperation that we have. हमारे लिए बड़ा मुश्किल हो जाता है, because decisions like this, which are overtly political, which have a very strong political kind of bias to it, or which are difficult to defend objectively, इस तरह कह रहे, which are difficult to defend from an objective, legal, standard-based thing, it becomes difficult for us, because then it reduces or waters down the efficacy of our overall message. If we are saying if international law is for cooperation and let's invest in this, then Pakistan may, the naysayers, of which there are the majority, then they will see it purely कि okay, FATF did this and they won this round, but let's securitize this, और भी इस चीज को हम इस space को reduce कर देंगे, reduce the space for discussion, and certain select entities will start looking at this purely in a Pakistan versus India forum, or usme hum phir we are more likely to
become reductive,
make mistakes and reduce our policy space. Rather than making the argument that Pakistan is willing to engage with the world, let us battle it out legally, let us battle it out on standards, let us give our perspectives. Then it will become just a tit for tat kind of actions. फिर हम भी बोलते हैं कि जी उनकी आप कर लें, India की mutual evaluation, Afghanistan की mutual, and it becomes kind of like using it to pull people down.
Right.
Having said that, we would be naive to know that generally with this emerging rivalry between China and the US, it's no longer, the world is moving away from a unipolar world. With the rise of China, with the rise of the EU, with the rise of Russia, with the rise of India, you're going to see global institutions become weaponized. They will become the battlegrounds for geopolitics, for geoeconomics. और ये चीजें आपको ये divide आता रहेगा. I even feel that parallel institutions will start developing, SCOs
alternative
frameworks, because UNB deadlocked hai. It's unable to resolve the pressing issues of our time. Palestine is a case in point. We know कि उसके अंदर legal मतलब Kashmir is also a case in point. Others भी हैं, the climate change पे deadlock है, Paris Agreement पे वो चीजें हैं. So the US, especially under Donald Trump, really, it was a jolt, because वो leadership, we saw it missing. Institutions are going to develop, they're going to be weaponized, they're going to be political, और FATF की तरह और भी आएंगी.
So this is, and what you're saying is absolutely right, but my perspective is this necessitates us studying these institutions even more, because this means that institutions like the FATF, they have loopholes that other countries are exploiting to achieve their geopolitical objectives.
Yes.
Why are we not using that? Why do we not have that standing?
So I would loopholes is one approach. That's correct. That is more of a weapon. Like you're saying that we can contribute to the, understand that this is a strategic threat and respond, and that's totally fine. That that is what is being done. एक और चीज जो हम ये भी कर सकते हैं is that we can become the sane voice, the bridge, because Pakistan will remain economically a country, at least for the next 30-40 years, which cannot play on the same field as China or the US or the Westerners. So we can become the voice or the leading voice as we used to be in the 60s and 70s for the rest of the world. Fine, you're going with these processes, but let's call for accountability of these processes.
Yes.
Whether it is FATF, for example, we know कि FATF की वजह से unintended consequences हुई हैं, financial inclusion पे problems आई हैं, NGOs globally के ऊपर problems आई, and that actually necessitated FATF for the first time this year to actually publicly on their website issue a call for insight all over the world कि क्या problems face आई हैं and how do we kind of tackle it. And we've seen entities like RSIL and in the UK issue papers arguing that FATF policies have to be kind of tweaked or changed because unka unintended consequences were. Actually, too much regulation is forcing people out of the financial sector
even more,
or zyada emphasis is towards the black economy.
Exactly.
So is tarah we do know that these processes are not sacrosanct, they're not, they're evolving, and Pakistan should be playing a role to call out processes which are unfair, which are not accountable, which are not transparent, which are where there is the greatest risk for political maneuvering. Because otherwise cooperation kaise hogi? I mean, how are we going to cooperate on climate change, which affects all of us, if the rules are not understandable and fair to everyone? How are we going to integrate on health security or on cyber, on multi maritime issues and trade and all of these things, economic corridor development, if we don't have kind of fair processes? So this is, I think, an evolution. I think आप जो बात कर रहे हैं ज़रूरी है. Pakistan, rather than wallowing in a victim mentality, let us try to understand it better. Let us see this setback as I think it should strengthen our resolve to study these things even more, develop even more capacity. This is what RSIL wants, is trying to do. That's what our objective is as well, कि आम लोगों को समझाएं, academia में, military में, civilian setup में, political setup में. They need to understand these processes because our talking points have gotten outdated.
That's true.
Diplomatic talking points, they're falling on deaf ears.
I think it's also important to emphasize that the only way we can make our voice heard or have people listen to us when we call out these things is if we actually establish ourselves as international responsible members of the international community. And in order to get there, again, it's like a cyclical thing. Work on these areas, implement them the way you've been asked to implement, co-opt yourself into the global world order. I remember studying this thing earlier with the rise of China, for example. In the beginning, it didn't really seek to create any parallel frameworks. Rather, it was working in the existing UN framework. It was working within the existing WTO frameworks. Even with FATF, we see China as a member of every big multilateral organization. And the idea was that you have to co-opt yourself into the world because creating a parallel system is costly and countries often do not want to bear the cost. It's easier for them to simply say, yes, I'll be a part of this thing rather than, no, I want to create something completely different. That was 20-30 years ago. And now China's long-term objectives, of course, may be changing with the Belt and Road Initiative. I'm not an expert on Chinese politics, isliye I can't talk more about that. But just the approach is such that it gave China, and it also helped us in a way that we have China's backing on these international forums.
Exactly. So I mean,
we should be posturing and putting ourselves in that position so that when we say something, we are actually heard. यहाँ पे थोड़ी सी एक issue आ जाता है कि why have we not been engaging with international bodies like other countries have been? Why are we not being proactive in that sphere?
We do know कि हमारे जो missions हैं बाहर मुल्कों में उनमें legal capacity नहीं है. They don't have input from legal experts on it. Our diplomats are excellent, but
Right.
they have to grapple with increasingly technical issues, technical
Right.
challenges
Right.
which require technical input. और वो ना वहाँ पे है, ना बैक एंड मिनिस्ट्रीज में है,
Right.
ना हमारा एक एकेडेमिया या थिंक टैंक कल्चर है जहाँ से they can pick out
Exactly.
specialist input. So
Right.
all of this, I think we're running short of time here as well, but
they're part of it's part of a huge debate.
It's part of a huge debate.
But
it's capacity. And if we build that capacity, I think that the capacity should be built with a noble objective to contribute to the issues which humanity is facing. So Pakistan is a country which wants to understand these issues, reflect on it, and contribute, especially as a voice for the developing countries as well, which is the role which we used to play 50 years ago. But at the same time, if a strategic challenge arises, or if a hostile state tries to weaponize those institutions or weaponize those processes, that enhanced capacity gives you that leverage or that understanding to detect that challenge and to timely respond to it in an effective manner. Yehi hamara FATF experience hai. 3 years ago, we were on the back foot. I think now we have more, there's more strength in our arguments because we have done a lot. We have done a lot. If we do more on this, again, the Reddit do more word, that should only improve our own talking points. That would only improve our own acceptability and diplomatically, reputationally make us more solid. And
just to sort of go back to the FATF argument, we see that the FATF is also willing to hear what the impact that it's been having with the RUSI report that you mentioned and the call for other reports. The thing is, we need to exploit these. We need to not exploit, but we need to cash in on these opportunities. We need to make sure that our voice is heard, and we need to respond to these things rather than leave ourselves and think that we're just implementing the action plan, we're doing this, let's just stick to that, let's not ruffle other feathers. If there are opportunities of holding such organizations accountable, we need to study, again, goes back to study the organizations, study how you can
and write on them,
develop academic capacity in these areas, and
get our point across.
Capacity building for even our academics as well. Because we always talk about criminal justice reforms, hamare investigators nahi acche, they need to be retrained, or judges need to be retrained. I feel like our academics need to be retrained. We need to reorient our
universities have to focus
on these areas, on global governance, international relations, task force bodies, how we can co-opt ourselves into the existing global regime.
Absolutely. Thank you, Noor. Thank you so much for your insight. It's always fun to have a discussion on these issues. For the viewers listening to this, if you have an interest in this, or you feel that you can contribute to the work that RSIL is doing in this, we will welcome your input, your suggestions, your feedback. Please write to us and please visit us and engage with us because, again, ye ek whole of nation approach. We should not just be dependent on the government, on state institutions. They're already plagued with so many challenges and capacity issues and workload issues. I feel that this is something which every citizen Pakistani who can contribute in a technical capacity in getting our viewpoint across, or on working on getting these frameworks implemented better. I think this is something which is an obligation on us as citizens. It's a moral obligation, it's a religious obligation, and ultimately I think it will yield dividends for all of us.
That's the hope, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.